Okay, hi everybody. Today I'm going to demonstrate how to make pie crust. So all you need for pie crust is flour, salt, really cold fat. So I'm going to be using a blend of shortening and butter, and then ice water, so really cold water. All right, so first we're going to measure out our flour, and we're going to sift it with the salt. And we're just going to sift it to remove any lumps that might have formed. You don't have to sift. You could just stir it with a fork or a whisk or something like that. But I'm just going to go ahead and show you how to properly sift flour. Okay. So we need 2.5 cups of flour. So scoop everything in and kind of pour some of that flour in. Level it off. So in my sifter, kind of the spoon, and then sweep it away, making sure there's not a lot of like flour built up on the sides or anything. So 2.5. Making sure your bench scraper is nearby. I use it for everything. And then we need 1 teaspoon of salt. So I have my salt right here. We're gonna go ahead and sift the salt with the flour just to remove any lumps and make sure it gets mixed together nicely. So I'm just using my fine mesh sieve to sift. I like it better. I just think it's easier. I don't like having superfluous equipment around. It takes up valuable storage space, right? So holding this hand flat and then this hand taps against it. I see a lot of people kind of like do this double tap thing. This one, think of it as a wall, and this just taps straight against that wall. Kind of press some of that last little bits through. All right, so that's our flour. And now we're going to do the cut into flour method. So we're going to cut the fat into the flour. There are a couple ways we could do this. We could do it with a pastry blender. Pastry blender is a really useful tool. You can kind of just toss things. You could use this to stir and sift almost. I'm going to show you a little bit how to use this, and then I'll also show you with hands, because I think our hands are a very valuable tool, and it's good to know how to do things with your hand to really feel the dough, feel the texture, kind of like feel what's going on. So we need 1/2 cup of butter, which is the whole stick. Well, okay, so what I'm going to do is, so 1/2 cup, 8 tablespoons. There's a lot of fat in pie crust. Move that out of the way. Kind of scoop that guy. All right, so I'm going to cut this in half. It's really cold. That's how I want it. I'm just going to drop these little pieces into the bowl. You want to move as quickly as possible to avoid melting the butter. And so really, luckily the metal table is really cold. My bench scraper is cold. My hands, however, especially your fingertips, are really warm. So you want to make sure that you don't touch the fat too much with your hands. Then I'm going to use 1/2 cup of shortening. So 1/2 cup of butter and 1/2 cup of shortening. My shortening was in the fridge, so it's really nice and cold. I'm going to use a spoon to kind of press that in, make sure it's nice and level, right? And then just kind of blobbing this out. So shortening provides not any flavor, right? So that's why we want to use butter. But it does provide a really good texture to our pie crust, which is why I like to use a combination of butter and shortening. The butter really gives us that flavor that we want, but the shortening kind of aids in the texture. So what you want to do is a rub like money motion. So you take the fat and you kind of force it into the flour and break it into tiny pieces. So rubbing like money, like look at my dollar bills, whoop, whoop, right? So just pushing thumb down into your pointer finger, middle finger, that sort of motion. It can be kind of tiring. They're weird muscles that we don't use a lot inherently anymore, like we used to when we did a lot of manual labor, right? As like a species we used to. And we just don't do as much with our hands. I mean, we type, right, and text, but not nearly as much as we used to. So a lot of people feel this work, right? They feel it in their fingers, kind of in your wrist a little bit, even like up into your forearms. But just rubbing the fat into the flour. This is called cutting in. So you're forcing the fat into the flour. You want to aim for pea-sized pieces. So really tiny little pieces there. And so there isn't any leavener in the pie crust, right? It doesn't rise. It's not a quick bread. It's not a yeast bread. We are, in order to get the puff that you see in pie crust, we're relying solely on steam. And that steam comes from the fat, so from our shortening and our butter. Now what happens is the fat is primarily fat and water. And as it melts, the water is going to evaporate. And as it evaporates, it creates these little pockets of steam, and that goes poof, and it creates these little poofs all over the pie crust, and that's what gives a pie crust like its really flaky texture that is, super desirable in pie crust, right? That flaky texture is what we're after. So, rub like money, right? Rubbing, trying to work as quickly as possible so that we don't melt the butter. Some people will say you can chill your flour. You definitely want to leave your butter in until you're shortening until you're ready to get started. And you don't have to use shortening. You could use 100% butter. The shortening does create a really nice flaky texture in your pie crust. So it can help. And then the butter also creates a flaky texture, but it does provide more of that flavor. So you should have nice pea-sized pieces. I have a few more, almost there. Okay, cool. So you could have done that too with the pastry blender, right? And you just force that in like this. And then you can kind of use it to stir as well. If you don't have a pastry blender to stir with, definitely just use your hands, right? And then once it gets time to stir, you could use a fork. I prefer, or a spoon even. I just prefer to use my hands. I like to feel the dough. So what we're going to do now is to slowly begin. I just want to make sure I don't have too big of clumps in here. But it has a nice kind of crumbly consistency. All right. We're going to slowly drizzle in some water. So the recipe calls for about 4 to 8 tablespoons, and there's so many factors as to how much water you're going to need, right? How did you measure flour? How dry is it? How humid is it? It just like so many variables that there's a range because you just want to have that flexibility. You don't want to be so rigid in your ways that the recipe says 6 tablespoons and you're scared to go above or below that amount. So I'm going to add in about a tablespoon and another tablespoon. I'm just going to start mixing this together. Still really dry and crumbly, right? Not much coming together at all. Okay? So, but we're getting there. So what you want is for it to all come together, to be able to see your fingers, but to not have it like crumble apart. So I'm going to add in about 2 more. Okay. So 8 tablespoons again is half a cup. So you want at least to fill your cup with half a cup of water and then add in the ice. Make sure your water's nice and cold. So again, my pie crust, it's starting to come together, right? But it's definitely still crumbly. So I'm gonna add a little bit more. 1, 2, right? You should probably measure. I've just done this a lot. Okay, and it's starting to feel like it's coming together. Perfect. So what I'm going to do is what I'm going to do is dump it out now so I can work it a little bit. You don't want to overwork it though. So you need to work quickly, and also like, get that thing out of my way. Come on. Okay, it's still there a little bit. There we go. Okay. So it's starting to come together, right? So I want to work quickly, but you don't want to be like so quick that you're frenzied about it, right? So kind of bringing everything into a nice disc, making sure it holds together well. Yeah, it's coming together. Okay, so I'm going to cut this in half, form each half into its separate disc. So what you want to do is sort of press it into a nice flat disc like this. So you should be able to see in here these beautiful pockets of butter and fat, those little dots. That's what we're aiming for, right? That's the good stuff. So you make one disc. It's okay if it has these little cracks, right? That's what's going to make your pie crust really nice. This isn't too dry. It's good. And then we'll do the other disc, right? So just pressing it into a round and then a flat disc. And the reason we do this is to chill it, right? So what we're going to do is wrap it in plastic wrap and then pop it in the fridge. And you want to chill it minimum 30 minutes. If you're in a time crunch, ideally minimum 2 hours. You really want to allow everything to set up and chill again. Okay, so we're gonna chill it for 2 hours. Wrap it up and chill it. We have this beautiful pie crust here, dough. You can see all the little flakes and specks. Yeah, that's what we're after. Oops. Okay, so it chills. Ta-da! Oh, magic! It's already done. It's out of the fridge. I'm not fancy like Food Network. I don't have somebody, I don't have my pre-chilled pie doughs already. I mean, I could have had I thought through this a little bit more, but you know what? Teacher life, I'm on a schedule. I got grading to do. I don't have time to be making pie crust and chilling it and planning, so here we are. Okay, this just came out of the fridge after 2 hours of chilling. Magic! It's really nice, it's workable. I'm gonna unwrap it and let it kind of cool, or not cool, to sort of warm up a little bit so that it's easier to roll. And then when I'm ready to roll, I want to have a bowl of flour nearby. And I'm going to lightly dust my work surface, lightly, right? It's not a ton of flour, it's a very light dusting. Put there. Then again, just a light dusting on top, right? Little bit. That was maybe a teaspoon or 2 of flour, right? It's a very tiny bit. I like to take a little bit of flour from my hands and rub it on my rolling pin. When we roll out pie crust, use the edge of the rolling pin, always square to the table, right? Shoulders square to the table. Start in the center, roll it towards you, start in the center, push it away from you. Stop. Pick it up. Make sure you have enough flour. Rotate. So you don't want too much flour because you don't want to dry out your pastry crust or your pie crust and make it dry and crumbly, right? You still want it to have that moisture, so just a little bit, but you don't want it to stick. So center towards, center away. Pick up some of that flour, rotate. Center towards, center away. Rotate. Center towards, center away. Rotate. So as I work, right? I'm rotating, I'm picking up some of that flour. If it starts to stick, you can dust just a light little bit, right? Always towards yourself, away from yourself, and then rotate. Don't start to do this nonsense because you're going to put more pressure on the bit that's closer to you and less pressure on the bit that's away from you, and that's going to create an uneven rolling. Then rotate again, right? And you can rotate it to how you want it to, like, where you need to work it. So like I want this part to kind of get a little bit bigger. I'm gonna move this over here, right? And it's okay if it's not a perfect circle, right? It's fine, because guess what? We're gonna put it in a pan. We're gonna trim off the edges. And pie crusts are very flexible in terms of like patching, right? If it's covered up, you're not gonna see it. So like if I had a big hole like right here, I can patch it. It's fine. It's not gonna be a perfect round every time you do it. And like right here, right? I don't really like that. I'm just gonna patch it up. It's fine, we're human, we can't roll them perfect every time, especially if we pretend that we cooled it and we didn't actually. Okay, so what you want to do is just make sure that this is going to fit and you're going to have enough overhang on either side. I'm going to patch it right there a little bit. I'm going to patch this here. So I love having a bench scraper around all the time, right? I use my bench scraper for everything, for cleaning, for moving my dough, for picking up stuff, scraping things off the table. Like, it's just such a handy tool. Okay. One more rotation. Oh no. See, I broke it. That's okay. Okay, we're gonna stop there. So, yeah, I'm good. There are a couple ways that you can put your pie crust into the pan. You can roll your pie crust onto, see, this is the problem with not letting it chill, is that it's kind of warm, so it starts to want to stick a little bit more, right? So we can just kind of roll it onto our rolling pin and then just unroll it into the pan. Voila! And then you can take it and kind of shimmy it down the sides. Gentle, not like forcing the dough into the pan, but you definitely want to make sure that the dough hits all the way in the bottom. Right, so I had that little crack there. It's totally fine, you can't even see it, right? Because I've patched it up. And then you want to have a decent amount of overhang. So if you guys are doing a pie where you're going to bake the filling with the crust, then you could leave it like this, put your filling on, and then you just put the whole thing in the oven, right? If you're blind baking, then you would want to prep the crust, put your pie weights or dried beans in there with a liner, of course, like parchment. Bake your crust and then take it out and then fill it accordingly. So what we want is about an inch overhang, because we want to have some dough, some like workability here. So I'm going to take my handy dandy, maybe I want this much overhang. I guess I don't know really how much that is. Let's see. It's like half an inch of overhang from the edge of the pie pan, right? So you could use a paring knife to do this. Just be careful. Scissors work really well as well. Just trimming off any of the funky bits, right? And the edges. So you want it to be consistent so that your crimping around the edges is nice and consistent. Okay. I have a little bit too much over here. So you want to try to keep it as even as possible, right? And then this dough, can go here. This dough is pretending to be chilled in the fridge. I'm going to use it in just a second. So, okay. So my personal favorite way to crimp the edge is just to use the finger method. So what you do is you tuck, make a big, like a tall wall, right? So make a wall, kind of tucking the edge in along your pie. This is if you're not doing a top to your pie. This is how you would do your edge. Okay. I don't need that piece. Okay. So I have this kind of tall wall. I'm feeling it for consistency to make sure there's not like super thin bit or super fat bit. And then what you do is I like to take my pointer finger and my thumb on both sides and kind of put them in between each other, like that, lock. The other way would be just to do one finger, but I like this double poke. You could just do poke, poke. This works for me. It's what I learned as a kid. And so you're just going to go all around your pie crust, poke, crimping the edge. Now, super simple, really nice looking crimp, right? Oop. Lifted it up too high. Okay. Yeah, so that looks really nice. I like that. It's easy to do. So again, this all the way around. So you poke and then you switch, right? And you kind of like just keep going, boom, boom, boom. The other way would be to, you could do fatter crimps too, right? So some people, I'm going to kind of play with this dough a little bit. Some people like to do a larger crimp where I always say that I'm a little more like OCD, so I have these like tight little crimps, but you definitely could do like a bigger crimp, right? Where you kind of spread your fingers out more. Oop, stop that. And it's kind of a really nice, kind of like more mellow, wavy pie. So I'm just using a much wider grip on my fingers. Right, so this is like a much bigger, softer edging. Oh my word, I can't do that. So that's another option, right, for your pie. The other thing that you could do, so this is if you're just doing your pie like this, pour your pumpkin filling in, pour your pecan pie filling in, put it in the oven, give it a nice bake. Lowish temperature, 325 is usually pretty good. So this is a nice whoopy, sort of slow, kind of gentle crimp, right? Bigger. So my fingers are just like really spread out. Okay. If those aren't working for you, you can just use a fork and you can just tap the fork into the edge to just kind of lay it flat, right, with fork marks. I'm like killing this dough slowly. So you would just tuck the crust in and then just press with a fork all along the edge. You could also press with a knife and make sort of like a diagonal pattern like this all around, right? That would be fine too. The other thing you can do is clip the edge. Kitchen shears is clip, clip. And then you can twist these to make kind of a fun twisted edge, right? So you clip it and twist it in. My dough's a little sad because I've been playing with it so much. So, okay. If you are doing a covered pie, you want to leave the overhang and set your pie away for a second. And then you want to roll out the top. So whenever you're starting to roll out your pie, you want to make sure that you get any crumbs away from your work surface. Okay, the crumbs will sort of attract more dough, and that's not great because then you're going to get a big buildup of clumps, and it's more likely to tear your dough. So again, light dusting, right? Light dusting. Make my disc super light. Center in, center away. I'm gonna rotate. There's a little piece of dough there. Center in, center away. Rotate. And you can feel your dough periodically, right? To make sure, that you're getting a nice consistent. So you can kind of feel, you'll be able to see inconsistencies when you're rolling. Even pressure, which is why we don't roll like this. And you also don't go like really aggressively. That's not how you roll. 1, 2, okay? Rotate. The rotating's really important to ensure that it's not sticking to your surface. 1, 2, right? So rotate. If you don't rotate and move your dough around, you're not going to know if it's sticking or not, right? And then you're going to lift it up and it's going to stick and you're going to be upset. It's going to be a hot mess. So don't do that. 1, 2. It's much better circle this time. Right, so you see, again, I'm not going back and forth, back and forth. It's a quick and quick. And by starting in the middle, you're ensuring that you have a nice, even roll, right? And look how nice my circle is this time. So that's plenty big. I'm going to try to demonstrate 2 different things with this one crust. So pretend I have my filling, my apple pie filling, my pot pie filling. I have this nice, beautiful mound of stuff in the middle, right? So I can either roll it up, or another trick some people do is they fold it in half, fold it in quarters, and then stick that quarter in the pan. You probably wouldn't do this like into the pan if it were full of stuff, right? You would just lay it on top, and then you cover it. Then you would do the same thing, you'd trim, and then you would crimp it together, the top one with the bottom one, to seal the edges. If you feel like it's not sealing, a little water on your finger, just stick it together, right? And that can help ensure that it stays together. So if you had both edges, you would just build that wall with both the bottom and the top doughs and crimp them together, or press with a fork together. That's another easy way. So leave a little overhang, trim it down to as far as you need. If you're crimping with your fingers and you want the height, then you need to leave a little overhang, build up your wall, crimp. If you're just doing the fork technique, trim it to the edge, press, 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 press all the way around. That's how you would seal it. Now, if we were doing a lattice top, this is hard because I'm trying to show you guys a bunch of things with this very delicate pie crust, right? You can see these beautiful patches of fat in there. If you were doing a covered top, you also want to make a slit. So you could like put an X in it, or you can do like, 1, 2, 3, 4 slits so that you have 4 steam vents, but you want to vent so that the steam can escape, okay? If we're doing a lattice top, which is the basket weave, what you want to do is cut your strips in equal thickness, right? So cutting your strips, I personally like about 1 inch thick strips. I think it looks nicer. Thin strips can look okay. I prefer a thicker strip. I just think it looks pretty. You could do really thick strips too. You could do like 4 big fat strips, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 4. That can look really cool too. So you can really play with your pie crust. You just want your strips to be consistent in thickness. You don't want one skinny strip and one thick strip, unless that's the pattern you're going for. Skinny, thick, skinny, thick, skinny, thick, right? That would be okay. But for the most part, you want them to be different. So for a lattice top, what you do is, I'm going to remove this pie crust to show you something. Okay, so pretend this is my pie filling. My filling's super full. It's this beautiful apple pie, right? I'm going to place a strip like this, okay? We'll just do 4 because that's about all the strips I have. And then what you do is every other. So I'll start with these two, and I'm going to fold those two back. And then I'm going to place this guy there and fold these two back over. Now I'm going to alternate, and I'm going to flip these two back. They're different. I'm going to pop that one there and flip these two back over. Then do the other two. Or 3 or 4 or 5, right? Like, it's just every other. And then back over, and then these guys. And then back over. So you should have this nice woven looking top, right? You want to make sure that the spacing is consistent throughout. Yeah, and if this were a pie for reals, I would want to make sure I had one here, 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 and here. You wouldn't want to leave these gaps. That would look really ugly. Okay, some people prefer to do a tight weave too, where they don't leave any gaps, which you could definitely do. Let's see, I'm going to kind of remove some of that superfluous pie crust. Okay, so this would be like a tight weave, right? Oh man, this is hard with this view of this guy. So a nice tight weave. It's all packed in together, not as much space. So that's another option. Okay, so that's kind of Pie Crust 101. I hope that helped. You always want to brush your pie crust with an egg wash before you put it in the oven. It's going to give it that nice golden shiny sheen. So take an egg, crack it into a bowl, whisk it super, super well, really blend that egg. You don't want any like chunks of egg, right? So really, 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 really whisk it till it's all one homogeneous mixture, no separation of anything, right? Yolk, white, it's all mixed together. It's really smooth. You can add a little bit of water if it seems a little bit thick, or milk. And then you take your pastry brush and you just brush the whole pie crust, right? Anything that's showing. The oven doesn't lie. So when it bakes, you will see the spots that you missed of egg wash, and you don't want to see any of those spots. So you really want to cover the whole pie with egg wash. If there's any spots that pool, right, like a lot of egg wash is pooling in any spot, you're going to see that when it bakes too. So you want a consistent, even egg wash. You don't want like a thick layer of egg. It's just a wash to brush on the surface, give it the shine, but you want to make sure it's a thin layer, it's consistent, it's not pooling, there aren't any bare spots. Okay, so enjoy. Hope you learned something. Thanks for joining. Good luck.